My name is Amir. I'm one of the co-founders and CTO of 0x. For the second part of this presentation, we'll bring on my colleague Fulvia to talk about our most recent product launch. Before jumping in, I think it's really important to understand 0x's mission. Will talked about this in a lot of detail, but I really want to just drive it in. Our mission is to create a tokenized world where all value can flow freely. We believe that over time, millions and millions of assets will be represented as tokens on public blockchains. So why is this actually important? This creates new markets for new value that does not exist today. So an example of a type of asset that just recently became tradable are video game items. People own these things previously, but they really couldn't derive any value from them because marketplaces for them did not exist. Number two, this democratizes access to markets, increasing efficiency around the world. So this will create more equitable and fair markets across the world and break down artificial barriers across geographic locations. And number three, this will reduce coordination costs and information asymmetry across the world. So we're very optimistic that prediction markets, for example, are going to be a very important part of our decentralized future. And even if you're not directly participating in a prediction market, if there is a market for any given event happening at any given time, people can simply look at those markets and figure out the probability of that event happening and use that to make better decisions. So what is 0x? You all saw the video, but I'll elaborate a bit more. So it is a protocol for decentralized exchange. We view decentralized exchange as a critical piece of infrastructure to get us to our vision of a tokenized world. I think the exchange piece is pretty self-explanatory. Tokens just aren't that useful if there's no way to acquire them. But the decentralized aspect is pretty interesting as well, right? So in this world where new tokens are just constantly popping up, we believe that the current centralized marketplaces will not be able to support them. We want markets to develop as quickly as assets are created. In addition, because tokens live on public blockchains, they can also interact with smart contracts and derive value from doing so in a trustless way. 0x at its core is a system of smart contracts. They are completely upgradable and upgrades can be voted on by token holders. And these smart contracts can be reconfigured and kind of combined together to allow for trading and settling assets in a variety of different ways. And then finally, 0x supports trading many different types of assets, and new types of assets can constantly be added and supported within the protocol. This is a snapshot of many of the companies building on 0x today. So this really includes a large variety of projects. We have kind of traditional trading interfaces. We have margin trading platforms, prediction markets, collectible marketplaces. And to date, this image is actually slightly out of date, but 0x has processed close to 1 million total transactions, and close to $1 billion in value has been settled through the protocol. So I want to start at the beginning. So Ethereum was launched. People started experimenting with smart contracts pretty quickly, and decentralized exchanges were actually among the first type of smart contract that was built on Ethereum. But the original decentralized exchanges were fully on-chain. They were slow, they were expensive to use. People had to pay fees to both place orders or to consume orders. And there were many different projects that started that required decentralized exchange to be useful, and they all started building their proprietary solutions. So it became clear pretty quickly to us that this was not what was going to support this tokenized world. we needed more efficient solutions, and we needed everyone to be speaking the same language. So how did we solve this? So 0x was one of the first to innovate on the fully on-chain decentralized exchange model, and we actually took a piece of that off of the blockchain. So orders in 0x live off-chain, which means it is completely free to place an order. However, to take an order, that happens on the blockchain, and at that time, the trade is settled. We also created a standard messaging format so that all the different network participants can speak the same language. And we think this will create a lot of benefits so that liquidity can all aggregate in a single place. This is a visual of how trade settlement works on 0x. A maker creates an order off the blockchain. A taker can discover that order through any arbitrary way, submit that to the 0x smart contracts, at which point the trade is settled on-chain. So I mentioned the idea of this, this global liquidity pool. We view liquidity as a public good in the 0x ecosystem, and ideally, any decentralized application can tap into that liquidity. In our white paper, we actually outlined this idea of having a single decentralized global liquidity pool. When 0x was first launched, it was very agnostic to how these off-chain orders were actually distributed. But in late 2018 and early 2019, we started researching this concept very heavily and ended up building 0x Mesh, which is a peer-to-peer network for distributing orders fully off-chain. Mesh is lightweight and can run in a browser, so you can literally just open up a browser tab and you will be running a Mesh node. And I think the main benefit of Mesh is that it's permissionless to access, it's uncensorable, and it also just creates this single place for liquidity to aggregate. Here's a snapshot from a few days ago of the Mesh network. So you can see all these green dots are actual nodes in the network, and these are how they're interconnected and propagating orders to each other. In 2019, we started to attack a different problem. So for a decentralized network to sustain itself, it really needs its users to provide value to other users. There are a lot of different public goods within a decentralized network, right? Developing the software is a public good. Bootstrapping the supply side is a public good. And if these things didn't happen and people are not incentivized to do them, then decentralized networks would just, come to a halt. So in 0x v3, we decided to attack this problem and introduce stake-based liquidity incentives. So this is kind of our first step to moving to this sustainable model where now market makers are incentivized to provide liquidity and can earn rewards based on the amount of liquidity they provide and the amount of stake that they receive. I also mentioned that 0x protocol is completely upgradable. So in version 3, market makers actually receive voting power from the people that stake to them. We view market makers as one of the most important players in the ecosystem and want them to have extra control over the direction of the protocol. So this really aligns incentives with liquidity providers and the network itself. It also allows token holders to earn some amount of monetary rewards for participating and supporting the protocol. This is a pretty high-level image of how the new token economics work. So makers create orders, they provide liquidity in the network. Takers come in and they want to consume this liquidity. Every single time they do so, they have to pay a small fee denominated in Ether. This fee is put into a pool, a rewards pool, and then market makers who are staking or receiving stake can collect the rewards from those pool or from that pool that's proportional to the liquidity they provide, and the ZRX that they have staked. V3 has been steadily gaining adoption since it was launched at the very end of last year. To date, almost 12 million ZRX has been staked with market makers. And you can see that protocol fees have been increasing every single epoch as adoption has increased. And actually, everyone who is here today is now a ZRX holder. If you look in your goodie bags, you should have received a physical ZRX token, which I think at the very least has a couple dollars of ZRX on it. So if you want to check out the actual staking dashboard, you can go to zerx.org/ZRX. The next step in the evolution of ZeroX was kind of this rise of DeFi that was happening in the background throughout 2018 and 2019. So this started enabling services on smart contracts that were previously only accessible in centralized markets. It's led to a boom in stablecoins such as DAI and USDC. A lot of different lending protocols grew in popularity. You could now borrow and lend assets permissionlessly. This had a really large impact on the decentralized exchange ecosystem because before, the main use case for using a decentralized exchange was just like trading assets that you couldn't get on centralized exchanges. People would use them primarily for random ICO tokens. But with the rise of DeFi, people actually started trading useful assets, and liquidity became a much more important problem. And a lot of different smart contracts that didn't specialize in exchange now just wanted to consume liquidity, and they were not interested in creating their own decentralized exchange solutions. So this was always one of the main use cases that we were targeting with ZeroX. We wanted people to be able to consume ZeroX liquidity on-chain, and this actually started to happen with the rise of DeFi. And as Will mentioned just yesterday, the amount of money locked in DeFi hit $1 billion, which is a pretty huge milestone. So, as I mentioned, we always saw this as one of the main use cases of ZeroX. But as demand for easily consumable liquidity increased, we realized that there were two problems. One of ZeroX's strengths is its flexibility, but with flexibility comes a lot of complexity. There is a system of smart contracts, many different smart contracts that people can interact with. There's this off-chain component, there's a peer-to-peer network, there are many different trading models that people are using within ZeroX, and it just became fairly complicated to interact with. And for a new developer joining the ecosystem, I think it was just a bit intimidating. Where do you really start? There are just so many different things that you can do with ZeroX. And then in addition to that, ZeroX Mesh solved the problem of fragmented liquidity within ZeroX itself. But ZeroX is not the only trading protocol out there. And there was not yet an easy way to consume liquidity across all of these different decentralized exchange protocols. So in order to solve this problem, or these two problems, we built ZeroX API. And with that, I will hand it over to Fulvia.
Thanks everyone for being here. As Will and Amir already mentioned, the entire ZeroX team is really happy to have you here, and I'm pumped to tell you more about ZeroX API. But let's first do a recap. As Amir mentioned, ZeroX has been fortunate enough throughout the years to introduce solutions that take us a step closer to a tokenized world. First, we introduced off-chain order book with on-chain settlement. Later on, we introduced Mesh, the peer-to-peer network that aggregates liquidity within the ZeroX network. And last year, we also changed our token economics to make sure that incentives were aligned among our stakeholders. And just a few days ago, we introduced ZeroX API. ZeroX API is a professional level API that allows developers to source the best prices for any trading pair across decentralized exchanges with just one integration. Before I deep dive into the details of how it works, I want to give you some context. So since 0x was created, developers were able to create decentralized exchange user interfaces that were powered by 0x under the hood to facilitate the exchange of assets. This led to a Cambrianish explosion of different decentralized exchange models with different levels of liquidity, different prices, different distribution channels. There was also a wave of on-chain decentralized exchange protocols like Kyber, Uniswap, and Oasis. And while it was really exciting to see the ecosystem growing, this came with a problem, which is fragmented liquidity. Essentially, this means three things. On one side, you have very liquid assets that no one wants. Then you have assets that have a high demand, or people really want, like stablecoins, especially with the boom of DeFi, but that there's little to no liquidity. And then you have assets that are very liquid, that people really want, but it's really hard to access them because of they're poorly distributed. 0x API solves the problem of fragmented liquidity by introducing smart order routing. So what is this? First of all, it works like magic. But in reality, what it does is that it splits orders to optimize for price across on-chain and off-chain liquidity sources. The best part of this is that with the changes and improvements made in the version 3 of the 0x protocol, we're actually able to easily build bridges to new liquidity sources as they come up. And this is all without requiring any additional effort on the developer's end. Ultimately, though, what we're trying to do is to translate all of this into better prices. And today, I'm very proud to share with you that the initial data shows that we are on the right track. This graph shows that 0x API offers better quoted prices for the top 10 DEX pairs versus our competitors for about 70% of the time on average. This is important for us because we expect these prices to only get better and better as we add liquidity sources. And again, this is all without needing to have developers doing any additional work. But we're also fully aware that aggregating liquidity and having better prices is only actually half of the problem. The other problem is that the barriers for entry for developers are really high. And building smart contracts is hard, but building smart contracts that interact with each other and are composable is even harder. Before 0x API, developers had to create or build individual integrations with each liquidity source. We know that they, for a fact, were choosing worse prices just to have an easier integration. And what's really important to note here is that most of the teams in the space are still struggling to find product market fit. So no one in their sane mind would build liquidity or integrations with all these liquidity sources when they really wanted to focus on their product. 0x API solves this by basically giving the developers the option to access all of these liquidity sources with just one integration. So how does it work? 0x API leapfrogs the developer experience, and basically for DApp developers, with just one API call, they're able to get the best quoted prices from 0x Mesh as well as on-chain decentralized exchanges like Kyber, Uniswap, and Oasis. Potentially, they can also get quotes from market makers directly through the 0x API. This means that they don't require any proprietary tooling, and very soon, they will also be able to monetize these orders by adding an affiliate fee. On the other end, market makers can use this API, which is very simple, and it's actually something very similar to what they use for market making in centralized exchanges. This allows them to have more, when there's more taker demand, market makers can then actually be more profitable. The other thing is that we want this to be a public tool that is reliable and performant. And for us, this is very important because basically this means that developers using 0x API can actually build better products and better experiences. This graph shows that compared to our top 2 competitors, 0x API response times are very much faster. This might not mean a lot to you, or for many of you might not mean a lot, but from the developer's perspective, this allows them to build actually better products. These are just a handful of the teams that are already building with 0x API. Some of the largest of the teams with the largest traction in the ecosystem are actually already building with 0x API. But our work doesn't really stop here. Our goal is to lower the barriers for entry for developers and to do the heavyweight lifting for them so that they can focus on their product, which is what really matters. And with this, we hope to accelerate the growth of DeFi and our vision for a tokenized world. Thank you.